Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Sounds about right? Good? Good? All right, let's pick up our study of how we got the Bible. Last week, we talked some about how the New Testament got drafted, how the New Testament canon got put together. We said that one thing that was alarming to the early church leaders was the fact that not too long after the ascension of Jesus, some heresies or some false teachings began to come about. And we went through about three of those: Gnosticism, Marcionism, and Montanism. And we looked at some of the basic beliefs that they had, but a lot of them were an assault on the deity of Jesus and discrediting of him. And the early church leaders began to be alarmed by this, as you might expect, because it had only been a short time since Jesus had been on the earth, and then all of these false teachings began to arrive as a result. And the early church leaders said, we need to pull together as much of the essential writings of the New Testament authors as we possibly can. So they began to put this together, and it was a serious effort that began in the 2nd century and spread out actually over a longer period of time than you might have guessed. And various church leaders and writers made contributions. And then it wasn't until the middle of the 4th century that it was firmly established that the 27 books that we reference today, that we still have available to us today, were the ones that should be included in the New Testament. They discarded some others that were under consideration. For example, the Shepherd of the Hermas, some of the apocryphal books, and those kinds of things. And they said, this is our New Testament, and we should not, from this point forward, add to or take from it. And it was evidently quite decisive, because that was kind of the beginning of the end of the debates over what should or should not be included in the New Testament. And it must have been pretty authoritative, because so far as I know, we have not had any major debates over the content of the New Testament since then. And their work has stood up for approximately 1,600 years. So the criteria that they used, there were 4 different criteria. First of all, was it written by an apostle? And there are a few books in our New Testament that were not written by apostles, but apostles got extra credibility and extra consideration. Secondly, were these New Testament books antique or in antiquity enough that they could logically be linked to the 1st century, not just 2nd or 3rd or something like that. Thirdly, was the practical use by the churches. Did the churches at this point incorporate them into their sermons, into their teachings, and into their daily lives? And third would be the orthodoxy. Was it consistent with New Testament principles? If a writing came along that advocated something differently than the consistency of the teachings of Jesus and the apostles, then it would be rejected. And that's how the New Testament got put together. As I mentioned to you last week, it might on the surface seem like there was a lot more human participation than you had originally thought of. Certainly when I was exposed to this material, I thought that same thing, but I've come to accept that God's guidance must have been in it nonetheless, because of the durability of the New Testament over the centuries. So today we are going to take a little bit different tact. We have up until now been placing ourselves back in those biblical times and gone through the processes of putting the Scripture together into a biblical canon. We are going to kind of start from the present and work backwards in search of the original text, because the question has come up over the years, how do we know that what we're reading and studying today is exactly what the apostles and prophets and the other authors delivered to us? So we're going to go through the process of how that works. And I think you'll be very, very impressed in the amount of work that has gone into giving us the original text. We will get introduced to a topic known as textual variation, where one handwritten manuscript might have something a little different than the next one that is produced, and it's kind of a touchy subject because some people just react immediately and say, you mean you can't trust the Bible? Well, I don't think the topic is anything like that. And I think if you'll bear with me as we go through this, you will see that this is a faith-building and not a faith-destroying activity that we will go through. Okay, let's talk some about the peculiarities of the writing that these Bible. Yeah. All right. Okay.
If we really believe that God supplied this, He's written this, all this was written so that we might someday get to heaven, and then to think that He'll let it get messed up somehow, I just do not believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I know, but I had to say what I thought.
I'm not going to get in the middle of this. That's family. I'm not in that. Okay. All right. There certainly all languages work differently. All written systems work differently. Hebrew writing had some peculiarities, and when we talk about translating our Old Testament into our times, people had to really understand the language, because for a while Hebrew language had kind of gone out of fashion, almost out of existence. But it wasn't until maybe the 40s, in 1948, when the new nation of Israel was established, it rekindled a lot of interest in the study of the Hebrew language. But over the centuries, it grew out of practice and use. But the original Hebrew language had a lot of peculiarities that are difficult, I think, for us to cope with. First of all, they read from right to left rather than from left to right. So everything would be kind of backwards to us. They made no differentiation between small and capital letters, so your first letter of your name would not be capitalized. There wasn't any difference. They didn't have any punctuation. There were no commas, no periods, no apostrophes, no question marks. None of those things that kind of give our language some kind of expression and tell us whether it's a question or a statement or something like that. There were no breaks between the words, the sentences, or the paragraphs. So it was it's almost like trying to read computer code. No breaks at all. And this would be very difficult, I think. There were no vowels in any of the words. So it's all consonants. Let's do a little bit of practice on the Hebrew language here. If you were reading something from a Hebrew author and you saw this, how would you pronounce it? No, we got to go from right to left, not from left to right. From, form, firm, farm. Okay? You see some of the difficulty. So when the vowels are not there, there's a lot of pronunciation aids that are kind of lost to you. So this is one of the peculiarities of the language, and it would be very difficult for us to cope with. Let me give you some other chances to practice here. This is a passage from a well-known verse in the Psalms. Can anybody figure it out? There's no breaks. There's no consonant. There's no vowels. Yeah. Anybody? It's all one string of letters.
Several words.
Yeah, many words. Many words. That's not one long word.
Does it start with
No? Okay. Yeah, you got to supply the vowels.
You just pick some.
Yeah. All right.
I'm getting a headache.
All right. Okay. Okay, got to go from right to go to left. Yeah.
How do they know, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. How did they know? I think there's a certain amount of murkiness attached to it. I think you got to just work with the context more than anything else that I know of. Okay. Now that you've got the actual answer there, can you kind of see how the Hebrew system works? Okay. Let's do one more. Listen to Kathleen.
Is it a pronounced language?
Is
Or is this just...
It's a pronounced language, yes. Yes, they spoke it, yes. Kathleen's got a good start here.
She likes it.
Fought with it long enough? You want the answer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
We got the days.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. They didn't have the vocabulary probably that we had. Okay, so that gives you some of the idea of how difficult it would be to wrestle with that language and scribe it. Now think about if your job was to be a scribe and you were supposed to duplicate this. There's no breaks in the words, anything like that. How difficult it would be to do this accurately. Okay?
And it had died over time before
Yeah.
over the eons.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me throw another difficulty into it. In the gold box, I've put the word autograph. Now, the autograph is the word that was used to describe the original writing, let's say of Paul or James or John. Okay, the autograph. This is where the inspiration of God hit the page, the very original writing. Okay, now if you wanted additional copies, it was kind of an informal process. And I've put together a hypothetical process of duplicating an autograph from an apostle or a New Testament writer of some kind. Let's suppose that 3 scribes got access to this autograph. 1, 2, and 3. They would produce their manuscripts, numbers 1, 2, and 3. Then another scribe would come along and get access to the number 1 manuscript and produce his own manuscript from which numbers 13 and 14 would be produced. This is all just hypothetical now. Okay? Number 2 manuscript would be copied by number 7 and get turned into 15, 16, and 17, as well as 8 and 9. And then 9 would, their work would go into 18, and then the 3rd manuscript would go into 10, 11, and 12. 10 would go into 19, 12 would go into 20 and 21. Okay? It was an informal way of duplicating these writings, all by hand. Okay? Which manuscript would you consider to be the most reliable out of all this? Which one would you rather have in your possession than any of the others? The autograph, sure, certainly. Because, handwriting, copying by hand is prone to error if you're human at all. Okay? What would be the fallout if a scribe made a copying error in manuscript number 2? What would be the consequences of that? Okay? All right? Yeah, okay. 7, 8, and 9 would even if they were perfect in their duplication, they would have number 2's errors, plus any errors that they made on their own, right? And then so on down the line. Okay? Okay? And that's just a hazard of hand copying. Okay? And so there were, as time went on, there were some differences in these manuscripts. And we'll talk about some of those differences and how they got resolved. This is a question that will help us kind of relate to some of the ways in which the books of the New Testament were reproduced. All right, suppose you're a carpenter building a house. You come to the part of the construction where you're cutting wall studs. You can measure and cut them in 2 different ways. You can measure each 2x4 with a tape measure, mark it, and make the cut. Or you can take the first stud, use it as a pattern for the second stud, mark and cut it, then use the second stud as a pattern for the third, and so on. Okay? 2 different ways of going about it. Which method is likely to produce the truest walls? Yeah, the first one for sure. Why is that? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so by the first method, you're always going back to the standard, which is the tape measure. You're always starting with the standard. Okay? In the reproduction of the New Testament books, they couldn't always do that because those autographs got lost. I mean, if they had been preserved in a museum somewhere, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion. The second method, let's suppose that this person is a really good carpenter, but he just has a quirk that he is, in the way he marks it and so on and cuts it, he's a 1/16 of an inch off every time. Okay, so the first stud is going to be 1/16 of an inch off from what he wants it to be. Second one, how far off is it going to be? 1/8 of an inch. So on down the line. So the 1/16 probably wouldn't get noticed that much. But by the time you got about 15 of those cut, you got a problem, you know. Your house is not going to look straight. Okay? All right. Now, the application for the biblical text is this. The New Testament in its earliest centuries was reproduced by that second method. Copies of copies of copies. Okay? And so a lot of effort has been expended to cut through this and get us back to the original text. Here's ways in which text could be varied. First of all, you could start with a manuscript that already had something in it that wasn't exactly right, dropped a word or a phrase or something like that. So your source is not exactly right. Then human copying errors as that document gets reproduced.
That was the scribes that did that.
Yes, this is all by hand. They're called manuscripts because man always means what? Hand, manual. Yeah, okay. Okay? Sometimes, in an effort to clarify what was being written, scribes would insert their own notes, and it might be difficult to distinguish between the original text and the notes they put in there to try to help you understand it. Go over to Acts chapter 19, verse 9. Now, we live in an age where the study Bibles you can buy are really good, and they put a lot of footnotes in there and describe some of these textual variations. Look at verse 9. When some stubbornly refused to believe and spoke evil of the way before the congregation, he left them, taking the disciples with him, and argued daily in the lecture hall of Tyrannus. Does somebody else have some footnotes attached to that verse? 19 verse 9. Okay, all right. I'm not sure what that is. That wasn't what I was kind of looking for here. Somebody else have something else that? Okay. Does anybody have any note about Paul arguing from 11 o'clock in the morning to 4 in the afternoon? Does anybody have that note?
This is in Acts 19:9, right?
Correct.
But when some were becoming hard and disobedient, speaking evil of his way, half of them hated
Mm-hmm.
him.
Yep.
He withdrew from them and took away the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus.
Yes.
And then, footnote here, starts with the word stubborn. The Greek word always refers to defiance against God, and goes to Romans 9:18, Hebrews 3:8, verse 8, verse 13, verse 15, Hebrews 4:7. Truth rejected leads to a hardened heart, causing the life-giving message of salvation to become fragrant from death to death. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 16.
Okay. All right. I guess mine must be the only one that's got this note, but mine has a footnote that says ancient authorities read of a certain Tyrannus from 11 o'clock in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. In other words, when the hall was a.
But that was the last part of it.
Oh, okay. You got it. Okay.
Tyrannus was either the owner of the lecture hall or a philosopher who taught there. And if the latter, his name, which means our tyrant, may have been a nickname given him by his students. Paul used the hall during the afternoon break from about 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. when it would otherwise be unoccupied.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So some of the old manuscripts have this note about Paul being there from 11 o'clock in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and only a few of them have this. So it's presumed that maybe somebody was just making a note there, and it wasn't part of the original text. Okay. Fortunately, okay. Yes, Father.
Yes, when you said footnotes, right? The footnotes talk about at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I look at the word of truth in my Bible, they don't even have no footnotes for that verse.
Okay. Yeah. Some do, some don't. Okay, Kathleen.
You said there's a Bible, study Bible, sorry.
Yeah.
Are they all true?
Are they all true? Well, they do list these variations from one manuscript to the other. They list that, and what you will find in the main part of the text will be what they think is the truest. And then they put the footnote down at the bottom that shows that the possible variation. Yeah, exactly.
But then there's just that historical context
Yeah.
too, which verifies the Bible existence when it comes up against
Yeah.
these false teachers who want to impose man's view
Yeah.
over God.
Yeah.
And it's supported because the Bible and historical history are there.
Okay.
Was it originally written in the Hebrew, or?
The Old Testament was Hebrew and a smattering of Aramaic, and the New Testament would be in Greek. Yeah. Okay. Fortunately, in this whole process, even though it's flawed and is prone to human error, there's very little evidence that we found of intentionally distorting the message, trying to deceive or modify the text. You know, you just don't like the way this verse reads, and so you try to adjust it to suit your own liking. There's very little evidence that has taken place. All right, let me, just to reassure you, let's go through some examples of this textual variation, okay? Mark 6:3, go over there. It's talking about Jesus, and he's gotten people's attention for some of the things he's been able to say, for his wisdom and that kind of thing. And the people of his hometown kind of turn up their noses and say, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of the carpenter, and of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simeon, and are not his sisters here with us. Okay? Some of the texts, the original manuscripts, say the son of Mary. Some say the son of the carpenter and of Mary. That's an example of a textual variation. Now, does that affect your understanding in any way? None whatsoever. It's kind of a trivial, kind of a mistake that a scribe could have made, leaving out the phrase of the carpenter and of Mary, so on. Here's another one. 1 Corinthians 13:3, you probably recognize this one. If I give away all of my possessions, if my hand over my body to be burned so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Okay? Some of the original manuscripts said, if I give away all of my possessions, if I hand over my body so that I may boast, the to be burned is left out. Okay? That's another example of a textual variation.
Mine says to hardship.
Okay?
It says
Yeah.
burn, it says to hardship.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yep. That's another variation. Okay? 1 John 2:21. I write this to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and you know that no lie comes from the truth. Some manuscripts say because you know all things, and you know that no lie comes from the truth. Okay? Again, I don't think it affects our understanding whatsoever, but it is a difference from one manuscript to another. Here's one that's a little more interesting, I think. Matthew 11:19. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Now, those of you who have the King James or the New King James, what does it say?
I said, Matthew chapter 11, verse 19.
Yeah.
The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a wine drinker, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, but wisdom is justified by her children.
Yeah, by children. Okay, now this is a little more confusing, I think. How do you get deeds or actions confused with children? I believe the answer is that in the Greek language, there is one letter difference between deeds and children. And one of the manuscripts took it down as children, as kind of an exception. The King James was based upon that particular manuscript, and so they, unlike most of the other translations, they say wisdom is vindicated by her children. And most of the other translations say they're vindicated by her deeds. Okay?
Mine reads, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold a man gluttonous and a wine bibber, a friend of publicans and sinners, but wisdom is justified of her children.
Yeah, yeah. King James and the New King James are about the only two I know that say children. In fact, all the others say deeds. Okay. So, yes, Arnie.
I think the fact that your textual variants in our Bible study Bible, like our study Bible, will have a footnote.
Yes.
On the bottom page will tell us.
Yes.
To me, it just gives leads to credibility of the scripture.
Sure.
And work that was done.
The work that's put.
In the translating of the Bible show how they were trying to be as true as they could
Yes.
to the actual text of the Bible.
Yeah.
And another thing too is that you read the first several pages in your study Bible, it will tell you how the people who were doing the translating went about do their work. And oftentimes there'll be something said there about the variants,
Yeah.
how they identify them.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And the newer study Bibles now, they are putting more of these in because I think it reflects a little bit more of a mature audience that can handle the idea that there were variations from one manuscript to the other. But most of the variations are of the nature that we just looked at. They don't really change your understanding at all. You don't miss something by reading it one way or the other. There are only two major New Testament passages that are disputed heavily. One is the ending of Mark, Probably the earliest manuscripts had the mark ending as the people are trying to grapple with the idea that Jesus has been raised from the dead, but there's no mention of Jesus making his appearance at the end of Mark. But we do have Matthew and Luke and John that do mention it. So even if 9 through 20 wasn't part of it, we still have the content of that. The other one is the account in John chapter 7 going into chapter 8 of the woman taken in adultery. You know, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. That particular portion of it is disputed. Other than that, it's all just really minor stuff that, for the most part, that I can tell. Okay? So, given the fact that you've got these different readings in various manuscripts, how do you go about resolving it? How have scholars over the centuries done that? You could do one of two things. You could find your best complete manuscript and use it as a source. You can say, okay, this is the one we'll use. This is the gold standard here. Or you could do another way. You could assemble all the credible manuscripts and use the knowledge of the original languages to choose the most likely original text. Okay? Now, alternative number one would be the easiest. Just put everything to rest and say, let's just use this one. But number two, it's a lot harder to do. It's a lot more tedious, but it would probably result in the most reliable outcome, and that is the course that has been taken in giving us the Bible that we have. Scholars have wrestled with these textual variations, and I think they have given us an outstanding result. How do you go about determining how old a manuscript is? We said the original ones, the older ones, are likely to be a whole lot better. How do you determine which one is older than the other? Okay? Now we have carbon dating. And if the manuscript was produced on leather, wood, papyrus, vellum, some of those materials that we talked about when we talked about ancient writing, if it came from a material that was one time living, you could use carbon dating. And you can estimate about how long ago it was written. Okay? Secondly, what kind of materials did they use? If it was written on stone, there's a good chance it was really old. If it was written on clay, you know, maybe it's very old as well. Was it a scroll? The kind of thing that you think of the Old Testament prophets as using? Or was it a codex? In other words, a book like we have today. Codex structure didn't come about until quite a few years later, when they finally got materials thin enough that you could build a book out of it. Okay? This is a big word, paleographic characteristics. That's just the way that the writing was done. What kind of page layout did they use? What kind of lettering did they use? Didn't apply to Hebrew writing, but it would apply to the Greek. Secondly, was it what they call unsealed or cursive writing? In other words, was it block letters printed, or was it in cursive? Cursive writing didn't come about until about the 9th century. So if you've got something that was one of these unseals, these block letters, it's probably going to be older. Okay? Sources that they could use to resolve it. First of all, the oldest Hebrew manuscripts you can find would probably be helpful. Then in 400 BC, there was a Samaritan Pentateuch written by the Samaritans. They only accepted the Pentateuch, so that's all that they wrote. And you could cross-reference the Hebrew manuscripts with the Samaritan ones, and maybe get differences resolved there. Thirdly, in about 250 BC, the Septuagint was written, translating the Hebrew into the Greek, and you could use some of those documents to cross-reference as well. The Latin Vulgate was written about 400, about the 5th century, and you could use those translations to see how they put it together. And then we'll talk about these people a little bit later. The work of the Masoretes. They were a particular group of scribes. I call them scribes on steroids, simply because of the tedious way that they went about producing their manuscripts. We'll see some of the rules that they live by, but they took their scribing extremely seriously. And as it turns out, their work has been exonerated by some later discoveries, like, for instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls and that kind of thing, that confirmed that their work was just extraordinary.
That's what I was going to ask, John, is that was it a really major impact on the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery?
Huge. Absolutely huge. We'll talk about that. We've got a whole section on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we'll talk about why it was important and what they found. Okay, but that's how they dealt with the Old Testament. Okay, they've got about 3 different gold standards of the Old Testament, and they all date back to about 1,000 years ago. First of all, the Leningrad Codex, the Cairo Codex, and then the British Museum Codex. I've got pictures of each one of them. The Leningrad Codex is the oldest known manuscript of the Old Testament in our possession. And it was written about 1,000 years ago. And it did use the Masoretic text, those scribes on steroids who were very serious about their work, used it as a source. Any serious Old Testament translation uses the Masoretic text because it's just that good. It was written on parchment, bound in leather, and it's now in the National Museum of Russia in St. Petersburg. That's kind of an unlikely place for an Old Testament manuscript to end up, but there it is. And here's a picture of it. And it's been pretty well preserved. All right, then the Cairo Codex. It's not the entire Old Testament, but it does contain Joshua all the way through Malachi. It was written on parchment, one of the materials that we talked about when we talked about ancient writing. Some people date it as early as 895 AD, but some scientists say maybe it came along a couple centuries later than that. But it was kind of in the same ballpark as the Leningrad. It was given as a gift to the Karaite community in Jerusalem, and it's got an interesting history. The Crusaders came through and took possession of it, but somehow they had a change of heart and said maybe it belongs in where we took it from. And so it's been housed in the Hebrew University since 1983. So that's one of their treasures. And there's a picture of it. Looks like the writing is not as clear, but nonetheless, that's the Cairo Codex. Then the British Museum's got one. It's the entire Pentateuch. It's just the first 5 books. It's written on parchment, and it's from that same time frame, about 1,000. It was based on the Masoretic text, and it's housed in the British Museum. I think you can still get copies of it online. I'm not sure if you want to look into it, if you can read Hebrew. Okay, I told you the Masoretes were kind of the gold standard folks for the Old Testament. It was a group of scribes that were centered in Tiberias, and they worked over several centuries, from about 500 to 1,000. They helped a lot because they devised a system of vowels to help you with your pronunciation. They did a lot to keep the Hebrew language alive by inserting these vowels. They had an intricate numbering system. For example, each word was counted in each book. They knew the first word, the last word, and they knew the middle word of the book. So that if there were 15,000 words in the book, they knew word 7,500. So when a scribe produced a manuscript, they counted off the words, and if that word wasn't there at 7,500, they threw the whole manuscript away. Yeah, okay. Very serious about what they were doing. Okay, here's some of the rules. I found these fascinating. The rules that they use have been preserved for us. First of all, these manuscripts must, and I've highlighted, there's a lot of them. I've highlighted in gold ones that I think are really significant. must be prepared for synagogue use by a Jew only. Gentiles excluded from doing this. Length of each column is be between 48 and 60 lines. The breadth consists of 30 letters. The whole copy must first be lined, and if 3 words were written without a line, it was considered worthless. Okay? The original used to make the copy must be authentic and must not be deviated from the copyist, and the scribe must say each word aloud as he wrote it. No word or letter could ever be written from memory. The scribe must always look first at the original before writing his copy. A space of a hair or a thread must intervene between each consonant. A space of the breadth of 9 consonants must come between each section. No word must ever touch another. Before copying, the scribe must wash his whole body. While copying, the scribe must only write the name of God with a pen newly dipped in ink. Okay. Each time the scribe came across the Hebrew word for God, he had to wipe his pen clean. And when he came across the name of Yahweh, he had to wash his whole body before he could write it. Okay? Should a king address the scribe while writing that name, he must take no notice of it. In other words, yeah, just keep on writing. Stick to your work. Each scroll had to be checked within 30 days of its writing, or it was considered unholy. Every word and every letter was counted. If a letter or word was omitted, the whole manuscript was condemned. Okay. So those are the rules that they lived by. So I would say that they really took their work seriously. I could just see myself working for about 3 months on Isaiah, and I've missed a word, and they just right in front of me, they just throw it in the trash. Yeah. Okay, so that's how your Old Testament manuscripts were produced by the Masoretes, and you can understand why their manuscripts would be the ones that you would take most seriously. Okay, I promised you to comment on the Dead Sea Scrolls. You know, when we have games, sports, we have heroes and goats. Right? You're familiar. The hero is the one that makes the big play that wins the game, and the goat is the guy that makes the mistake that loses the game. In the case of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the hero was a goat. There was an Arab shepherd boy in 1948 working in Palestine near the Dead Sea, and had a flock that he was tending. Noticed one of his goats had wandered off. And like the good shepherd that Jesus described, he left the flock behind to go search for the goat. He noticed up on this bank of hills that there was a series of caves. And he said, maybe my goat, seeking shelter, went inside one of those caves. So he goes inside the cave, and he doesn't find his goat, but what he does find is a whole lot more important. He stumbled onto a whole system of caves, and there were clay jars that contained 900 different scrolls. Okay? And the combination of the fact that it was written on durable material, put into this clay jar, and then the dry natural climate of the area, they were just extremely, extremely well preserved. Yeah, yeah. These scrolls were written and collected by a group of Essenes. Now, they have an interesting history. They are mentioned once in the New Testament in Mark, but they were people who had kind of gotten fed up with the whole scene in Jerusalem. And if they had known Jesus, they would have been on his side on a lot of issues. Because they said this temple that we see now is corrupt. It can't be reformed on its own. And we're going to withdraw. They went out, way out into the desert where nobody else wanted to live. And they just said, we are going to spend our lives living by the law, the way that God intended, and we are going to scribe and collect teachings and manuscripts and that kind of thing. And we'll talk some more about it next week. But Dead Sea Scrolls is one of the great finds in archaeology, especially if you are a Bible believer. Second bell did ring, right? Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, John. One other announcement this morning. We missed the young man that graduated from Rochester Academy this year. This is Rochelle's grandson, Lewis's great-grandson. His name is Kamari, and this is really interesting regarding him. Because of his academic achievement, he got a full 4-year scholarship at Clarkson for computer science. So, he graduated. He's here. Rochelle, I see is here as well. She tried to get my attention. I said, throw a songbook at him. Anyway, it's a great opportunity to congratulate him as well for his accomplishment. I did talk to him for a few minutes. He's real reserved about it. He said, oh, you got good grades. I said, well, I probably could have been better, but I guess they were good enough to get what I needed anyway. He's got a really quiet, reserved manner about it, but you can see why he's being successful in his journey as well. Yeah, I think he might be downstairs. Did he leave, Rochelle? Okay, all right, good. In any event, congratulate Rochelle, and if Lewis will get a chance to see him as well. This powerful word of prayer, I'll bless the food, and we'll have our fellowship. Thank you, Almighty Father, for our time together again today. We have witnessed as people success for many among us, the grateful to God that your Spirit leads the lives of others in such a way. Continue to bless us today in our time of fellowship, and of course, your blessing upon the food prepared for our time together. We're grateful that we can share these moments. Bless us, please, in our time of conversation. It's in Jesus' name.